Hello, everybody. This is Daniel with Pious Reflections. I just got back from a Dominican Rite Mass, and I don't go to those very often because, number one, they don't happen very often in our parish. But tonight we were talking about Our Lady of the Rosary. There was a special Mass for that feast day, and there was this pretty incredible moment that I wanted to share with everybody because I feel like a lot of times people don't really, they're all over the place now, but, God moments in Catholic churches sometimes for Protestant listeners may not know some of the cool things that Catholics get to experience when they're in Mass. And I felt like this was an opportunity to share something pretty beautiful that happened at the Mass. And, this kind of comes back to this idea of the question that was posed to me when I was in seminary from one of our professors. What do you do about, obviously, the question of those who have never heard, but what about those who are disabled? What does it mean for them to have faith? What do those things mean? And one of my professors told me this story about how he was preaching at a big, huge church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it was one of the largest churches out there. And as he was preaching this sermon on faith, a group of Down syndrome kids rolled into the sanctuary and sat down and with their leaders and stuff to kind of keep them focused on the sermon and quiet during the preaching. And as he was about to kind of really get into his sermon, he suddenly had this epiphany of, I don't think that any of them are going to understand what I'm saying about salvation in this sermon. And he posed this scenario to us as the students in seminary. And this was not a Catholic seminary. For those that don't know, I was a convert and recent one. So, take everything I say with a grain of salt here. But at the end of the day, he put this question to us, and he said, what do you do with people like that? And the class began to discuss, they began to debate, God has mercy. Others were like, well, you got to have faith. So, if they don't believe, just kind of the back and forth. But everybody was pretty uncomfortable with the idea that Jesus didn't love these kids. And if they didn't say the magic prayer, of the sinner's prayer, that they weren't going to get into heaven. But it did raise an interesting question. What does it mean for salvation for these individuals? And that story had stuck with me for a long, long time. And I never really felt like the Protestants had an answer to that. And I still think that they struggle to answer that question because our professor, who was a very well-experienced missionary, he'd gone all over the world. He had done incredible work for God and given up his life in a lot of ways, as Catholics would say, better than most Catholics would. And he still said, sometimes you just got to let God be God, basically. That these kids are basically in a category of their own, and we don't really know what God's plan is for them. We don't necessarily know, but, given his mercy, I think we can be confident that he loves them as much as us, and he's going to bring them into heaven with whatever little faith they have. But this ultimately leads to a problem with the idea that faith is a mental assent to a belief, because not everybody can give a mental assent. But everybody can submit. And so that's where I wanted to go with this tonight. It was kind of a crazy situation. For those that don't know, the Dominican Rite is basically all in Latin. It's a longer Mass. It's similar to the TLM, although I've never actually been to one of those. But from those who have gone to both, they tell me that ours is very similar. And while I was there, the priest gave this homily about how when he was praying the Rosary, because today was our Lady of the Rosary feast day, and so the theme was a lot of the Marian prayers within the Rosary. And he started talking about this time when he was praying the Rosary and that he was praying the sorrowful mysteries. So for those that don't know what those are, when you have your Rosary, I've got one right here. I'll pull it out for you guys right there. So you got your big beads right here, and each one of those are a mystery. And by mystery, what we mean is that they're a divine mystery, like, in the same way of like, well, why would God send his son to die? It's a mystery to us. We don't really know why God chose that way, but he chose that way nonetheless. And so these mysteries are here for us to reflect on. And so as you go through the sorrowful mysteries, you'll end up going through the agony in the garden is the first one. And then you'll pray 10 Hail Marys. And then you go to the next one, which is the scourging at the pillar, pray 10 Hail Marys. Then you go to the crowning of thorns, pray 10 Hail Marys, go to the carrying of the cross, 10 Hail Marys, and ultimately end on the crucifixion. And one of the things that he said that he realized in this that kind of came to him, because, as anyone who prays the rosary on a regular basis, you get distracted every now and then. And he was praying the rosary and he got distracted, but then all of a sudden this moment happened where he realized the prayer to imitate and obtain all that is contained in these mysteries. And he focused on the word imitate. And he brought to our attention the fact that we are ultimately being asked to imitate these mysteries when we pray the rosary. And that's a pretty profound thought, especially when you consider the sorrowful mysteries. And he continued talking about how Mary gives us the rosary and in order for us to be shaped into Christ, like by meditating on these mysteries, that the rosary is a gift and that Mary ultimately wants to form us into the image of her son. In the same way that Christ was formed in her womb, so she wants to form Christ in us. And there was this, and it was just a beautiful image. And there were a ton of people there for Mass. Felt like people were going up to receive for almost 20 minutes is what it felt like. And but during Mass, there was this there was definitely a handicapped person in the audience, and during some of the music, you would hear some commotion in the back or a loud noise, or and it could be distracting, but it wasn't ever too much. And the Mass, for those who don't know, in the Dominican Rite, it's a lot quieter than the Novus Ordo. So there's a lot of prayers that the priest is just praying up there as we observe. And so this became a apparent thread. And one of the things that, as I went up to receive, I walked back to my seat and I knelt, and I noticed that this mother was walking with her child like this, in her arms. And they were the last ones to get up there. And they knelt down, and there was only one priest offering the Mass with a couple servers, but basically the priest was the only one offering. And this mother put her arms around her daughter as she was kneeling before to receive the Eucharist. And I thought of my professor's conversation about, what about these young kids who don't understand? And this mentally disabled person's was a teenager and much taller than her mom. And but the mom kept her calm at the altar, just like Mary would when we talk about, we find, shelter in your mantle or prayers like that. You couldn't help but notice the Marian image of this mother helping a disturbed child at the altar. And the child started to get a little bit more mobile at the front, started kind of moving her hands, and the mother gently brought her hands in. And one of the things that happened as the priest started to come closer, the child got calmer and calmer and calmer, to the point at which she eventually stopped moving, right as the priest brought our Lord to this child. And the child received Christ on the tongue for those that care. And then an interesting thing happened as the mother and her got up. And again, the mom was holding her like this the whole time. And it reminded me of St. Bernadette and the apparition. One of the things that they talked about with St. Bernadette's apparition of Mary at Lourdes was the way that Bernadette made the sign of the cross. When she was at Lourdes, people commented on the fact that she had made one of the most reverent signs of the cross that they had ever seen. And as they got up, the mother turned with their child and took her hand and helped her make the sign of the cross. And it was just a real powerful image of how Mary helps make us into the image of Christ, helps guide us into holiness. And given that it was Our Lady's feast day of the Rosary, or Our Lady of the Rosary's feast day, I just wanted to share that with you, because I think sometimes we forget that while the Mass may be rote or may seem bland to those outside the church, when you go into these churches, especially where there are reverent people, you see that at the foot of the cross, it really is true that we are all equal, and that there is something miraculous that happens at every Mass. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this impromptu reflection, and I hope that you will go to Mass. I hope that you will start praying the Rosary, and I hope that you will start looking for these divine moments when you're at Mass next time as well. Thanks a lot for listening. I'm Daniel Roberts. God bless.